Hi there, my name is Jessica, and today I'm going to teach you exactly how I perfected my macaron shells. If you're serious about learning how to improve your macaron baking skills, you've come to the right place. This video is for you. In just about 20 minutes, I'm going to teach you everything I've learned over 4 years of baking thousands of macarons. All right, let's jump into it. Like I mentioned, my name is Jessica, and I help home cooks learn how to master new skills in the kitchen. Today, we're going to cover 3 reasons why your macarons are failing, why you can't find the perfect foolproof macaron recipe, and the simplest way for you to improve your macaron shells. I'm going to share with you how I went from wrinkled, cracked, flat, and hollow macarons to beautiful, full shells every single time. I'm going to let you in on these secrets that I've learned over the last 4 years of baking macarons and how I did it without being stressed out every time I stepped foot into the kitchen. This video is for you if you want to have delicious and reliable macaron shells without the stress of failing, feel confident in the kitchen, and know that your macarons will succeed. Know how to troubleshoot if your macarons bake up not so perfectly, and learn how to master the core macaron baking techniques. So you may be wondering how I discovered these secrets to full, beautiful macaron shells every single time. Well, in order to share with you how I did that, I'm going to need to first take you back to when I first became interested in learning how to bake macarons. I started my macaron baking journey thinking that I could whip up macarons in one try, no problem. I would go through the process of starting to make my macarons by, of course, measuring out all of the dry ingredients, whipping the egg whites, mixing the batter, piping and resting, and then finally baking the shells, only pull them out of the oven and have my heart sink. Anything and everything that could go wrong with my macarons did. The feet baked up really large, the bottom stuck to the pan, the tops were bumpy, the inside was hollow, and the feet were lopsided. I baked up batches and batches of macarons, tried lots of different recipes, and spent so much money on ingredients, only to every time have my macarons come out of the oven looking like a complete disaster. After repeating the same cycle for about a month, I knew things had to change. There had to be an easier way to make macarons. So I hopped onto Google in search of some answer. I read through all of the Facebook groups, blogs, and forums that talked about macarons in order to try to glean the advice of other macaron bakers. But I knew in my gut that this wasn't the most efficient or effective way to learn how to bake macarons. I wanted a step-by-step guide on how to bake macarons, not hundreds of people's different opinions on why my macarons didn't bake up correctly. I wanted to have fun in the kitchen while baking, not dread pulling out yet another pan of ruined macarons from the oven. And I wanted my friends to finally taste my delicious and beautiful macarons, not waste more money on ingredients baking macarons that only ended up going in the trash. I finally stopped looking at all of the conflicting advice on the internet because clearly I was getting nowhere. At this point, I knew there had to be a better way and I was going to have to figure out some things on my own. I threw everything out the window and decided to start from scratch. This time, however, I decided to work on the core techniques and learn the science behind baking macarons. At this point, I had seen how overwhelming all the information on the internet could be, so I wanted to start over and first learn the basics. I needed to learn how to make meringue that was thick and glossy, and how to know once it had achieved stiff peaks. I needed to recognize how the macaron batter looked once it was properly macaronaged or mixed with the dry ingredients. I wanted to understand why the resting process was so important, and I needed to figure out how to find the perfect oven temperature so that way my macarons wouldn't crack or brown. So for the next year, I went to work. I read through so many baking textbooks and watched countless number of YouTube videos from professional chefs, all in the effort so I could finally get down to the bottom of things. After practicing the advice I had read and watched, I was finally getting somewhere. I was determined to make these macaron shells work. And that leads me to the top 3 reasons why your macarons are failing. Because you haven't yet mastered these techniques. Number 1, whipping your meringue to stiff peaks. Number 2, macaronaging or mixing your dry ingredients into the meringue and properly smoothing out the batter. And number 3, finding the correct oven temperature. Here's what you need to do in order to pull out beautiful macaron shells from the oven. First, you'll notice that the egg whites will hold a very noticeable indentation that the whisk makes as it's whipping. This is one of the first signs your meringue is moving from medium peaks to stiff peaks. While the egg whites can hold an indentation from the whisk at medium peaks, they become more prominent and noticeable during the stiff peak stage. Next, the meringue starts to ball up inside the whisk while it's mixing. This is something that can also start to happen during the medium peak stage, but at stiff peaks, the meringue is very thick and sturdy in the whisk attachment, and the meringue stays in place if you pull the whisk attachment off the mixer. Once I start seeing these 2 signs, I like to check the meringue by pulling the whisk out of the mixer. If your meringue is at stiff peaks, you'll notice that parts of the egg whites stand straight up. This can be deceptive if you pull out the whisk and a long strand of egg whites comes with it. But you'll notice that the smaller strands of egg whites stand up on their own. I personally like to check for these pointy offshoots of egg whites on the whisk and mixing bowl. This is something you won't see during medium peak stage because the meringue is still too fragile. Finally, let's test the texture of the meringue by hand whisking. You should feel a sturdy meringue that has some resistance. It doesn't feel too weak or flimsy. With some practice, you'll start to notice these small but important changes as the meringue moves from medium peaks to stiff peaks. Next, you need to learn how to properly macaronage. Macaronage is a term that refers to folding the dry macaron ingredients, the almond flour and confectioner's sugar, into the meringue. This process smooths out the batter and helps the macarons bake up with proper structure. During the macaronage process, not only are we incorporating the dry ingredients into the meringue so it can become one cohesive mixture, but we're also pushing out some of the air that was formed while we made the meringue. Before we can get to macaronaging, we first need to combine the sifted almond flour and confectioner's sugar with the meringue. To do this, simply fold the dry ingredients with the meringue using a silicone spatula. Normally, for proper folding technique, you'll want to start by placing the silicone spatula at the top of the meringue, then making a line through the middle and folding up like a J toward the side. This technique helps to keep the air in the meringue. However, since we are going to deflate most of the air during the macaronage stage, you don't have to worry too much about using the exact proper folding technique. We will continue folding the mixture until all of the meringue is fully incorporated and no dry bits of almond flour remain on the bottom of the bowl. Your batter should look similar to this. Now it's time for the macaronage process. Let's first learn how to properly macaronage the macaron batter. Similar to many other steps in the macaron baking process, this is something that with time, you'll get more of a feel for. Before we get started, I should mention that many people use different techniques for macaronaging. However, I'm going to show you the technique that gives you the most control over the batter. So you know what you're looking for, let's cut to a clip of perfectly macaronaged batter so you can see the correct consistency. Once properly macaronaged, the batter easily and smoothly falls off the spatula. The batter will be smooth, shiny, and have a flowy consistency, almost like lava. Now that you know what we're looking for, let's jump into it. Start out by slowly spreading the macaron batter along the side of your bowl, then wiping it back down into the bowl. As we're doing this, we're both deflating some of the air in the meringue and helping the dry ingredients meld with the meringue. After every swipe along the side of the bowl, I like to check the consistency of the batter. You can see that the batter is still really stiff. It falls off the spatula almost in one big clump, so we know it's not yet ready. Let's continue to swipe the batter along the side of the bowl again. As we're swiping, you can see along the side of the bowl that the almond flour is still very prominent and there are still pockets of meringue that are full of air. This is another visual indicator that the batter is not fully macaronaged. I'm going to go ahead and swipe the batter along the side of the bowl once more, then wipe it back down. Let's check the consistency again. I'll pick up the batter with the spatula and let it drop back down. This time we're noticing something a little different. The batter seems to be a little more flowy, but it isn't flowing off of the spatula as easily as it should. Another visual cue to pay attention to is this curved piece of batter that's left hanging off of the spatula. This is a sign you'll often see when macaronaging. It lets us know that the batter is still undermixed or under-macaronaged, and we're not quite to the lava-like flowy consistency that we're looking for. After another swipe along the side of the bowl, I think we're finally getting to the right consistency. Here are a few visual cues you can look for to know that your batter has been properly macaronaged. First, test by lifting your spatula and seeing if the batter drops almost like lava. Pay attention to how the batter falls back into the middle of the bowl. It should drop off and look almost like a ribbon. You'll also want to watch this ribbon that formed and count how many seconds it takes the batter to fully disappear back into the rest of the batter. It should take about 10 seconds. As you continue to practice macaronaging, pay attention to the feel of the batter. The batter should still feel a little thick. If it's too thin or runny, you've over-macaronaged. If it's too thick, you've under-macaronaged. Finally, you'll need to learn what temperature is best for your personal oven. First, it's important that you purchase an oven thermometer. An oven thermometer will help you verify the internal temperature of the oven. This is important because sometimes the temperature reading on the digital screen doesn't actually match the internal temperature of the oven. By using an oven thermometer, you can verify the internal temperature of your oven, as well as monitor any temperature fluctuations as your macarons are baking. This will help you accurately judge the temperature of the oven rather than relying solely on the temperature that's displayed on the digital screen. To set up your oven thermometer, first move a rack to the middle of your oven. Next, hook the oven thermometer in the center of the oven rack. Set your oven to your desired baking temperature, more on this in a minute, and then allow your oven to preheat until it reaches the proper temperature on the oven thermometer. Ovens can take a while to preheat, sometimes even up to 30 minutes, so make sure to give your oven enough time to be properly heated. After this, you can then double check the temperature on your oven thermometer to see what it says. If you notice that your oven thermometer is reading a different temperature than is displayed on the oven's digital screen, then you'll need to bump your oven either up or down until the actual internal temperature of the oven reaches the proper temperature that you're trying to bake at. I'd also recommend writing these details down so that you can remember it for future baking projects. I should also mention that oven thermometers do wear out over time, so I would recommend purchasing a new oven thermometer every year just to make sure that your reading is completely accurate. Now that you know how an oven thermometer works, let's talk about a general overview for how to bake macarons. Once you've made the macaron batter and piped it onto the baking tray, allow the batter to fully dry. Remember, it's important that you use light-colored baking sheets when making macarons. Without getting into the science just yet, a darker colored sheet pan will absorb more heat than a light-colored sheet pan and could potentially cause your macarons to have issues such as cracking. While the macarons are drying, preheat your oven to your desired baking temperature. Using your oven thermometer, check that the internal temperature of the oven has reached the proper temperature. Next, place your macarons into the middle oven rack and allow them to bake. The baking times for your macarons can vary oven to oven, so we'll talk more about this in a minute. In order to know when your macarons are done baking, it's important to learn the signs to check for doneness. Here are some indicators that you can use. Once baked, the feet and the edge of the macaron should feel firm when you touch them. Once fully baked, it feels like you could forcibly lift the macaron shell off of the baking mat if you needed to. Don't actually do this, just use it as a test. If you touch the shell and it wiggles or it's sticky or is wet, you know that the macarons need to bake longer. Once your macarons have passed the indicators on the doneness checklist, you can pull them out of the oven and allow them to cool on a wire cooling rack until they are no longer warm to the touch. Once cooled, gently remove the macarons from the baking mat. If baked properly, They should have a firm, not too soft top. The top shouldn't crack when you lightly press on it. Each macaron shell should have small feet with a slight vertical raise. You don't want lopsided or ruffled feet that are spread out on the sides. The bottom should easily remove from the baking mat, not stick to it. And the interior of the shell should be full, no hollow gaps. Now that you understand how to bake macarons, you can test different oven temperatures to see at what temperatures your macarons best respond to. Most macarons are generally baked in conventional ovens somewhere around the temperature of 280 degrees Fahrenheit to 330 degrees Fahrenheit. Start with these temperature ranges and see which range results in the best, most beautiful and full macaron shells. These are the 3 things that most macaron bakers struggle with the most. Do you see the difference between guessing when your meringue has arrived at stiff peaks versus having an actual checklist of visual indicators that you can use to ensure that your meringue is at stiff peaks? By now, you can probably see why my method for making macarons is a little bit easier than finding a random recipe online and just blindly hoping that you're following it correctly. By focusing on the core techniques for making macarons, you can eliminate the stress and all of the random noise of advice around the internet and actually focus on the basics that you know are going to get you the results you want with your macarons. Using these tried and true baking techniques, along with a guide of what to do and what not to do when baking macarons, can be the difference between baking up beautiful macaron shells versus wrinkled, flat, cracked, or hollow macaron shells that never seem to work out right.